لو آنکھوں سے دریائے خون بہاؤ، ماتم کرو حسین کا اور سر پہ خاک اڑاؤ، فرش عزا لپیٹ کے رکھو علم بڑھاؤ، 10 دن کا مہمان چلا تعزیے اٹھاؤ، اشکوں کو نظر دے کے امام انام کو رخصت کرو حسین علیہ السلام کو، رو کر کہو کہ اے شہ ابرار الوداع، اے کاروان درد کے سالار الوداع، اے امت رسول کے غم خوار الوداع، کڑی الجواں پہ سر کے عزادار الوداع، کیا جانے اگلے سال جئیں گے مریں گے ہم، پر قبر میں بھی تعزیہ داری کریں گے ہم، اے بے دیار و بے سر و سامان الوداع، اے امت رسول کے مہمان الوداع، حیدر کی روح فاطمہ کی جان الوداع، اے مصطفیٰ کی گود کے قرآن الوداع، عشرے کے ختم ہوتے ہی ہم سے بچھڑ گئے، مولا تمہارے تعزیہ خانے اجڑ گئے، ہاں دوست تو کمی ہو نہ اب شور و شین میں، صلوات۔
صلی اللہ محمد وآل محمد۔ یہ دن ہمارے 11ویں امام حسن عسکری علیہ السلام صلاۃ والسلام کی شہادت کے دن ہیں، اسی کے سلسلے میں مرثیہ پیش کرتا ہوں میں، صلوات۔ اللہم صلی علی محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجہم۔ شہر جہاں میں حسن عسکری کا ہے نقشہ نگی عرش کی انگشتری کا ہے، کونین میں یہ گل چمن حیدری کا ہے، در یتیم معدن پیغمبری کا ہے، در یتیم معدن پیغمبری کا ہے، مظلومیت مثال جناب حسین ہے، اور دبدبے میں فاتح بدرو حسین، اور دبدبے میں فاتح بدرو حسین، پر معتمد نے قہر کیا وا مصیبتا، ایسے ولی کو زہر دیا وا مصیبتا، ایماں کے گھر کو لوٹ لیا وا مصیبتا، خون جگر حرم نے پیا وا مصیبتا، پھاڑا کفن نبی نے، علی ننگے سر ہوئے بچپن میں ہائے میں دیے دیں بے پدر، بچپن میں ہائے میں دیے دیں بے پدر، ارواح پنجتن کو ستایا ہزار ہے، جنت میں مصطفیٰ کو رلایا ہزار ہے، تربت سے فاطمہ کو اٹھایا ہزار ہے، خبر شہ نجف کو ہلایا ہزار ہے، غلسہ میرے میں ہوتا تھا جس وقت بین کا، یا کربلا میں ہلتا تھا مرقد، یا کربلا میں ہلتا تھا مرقد حسین کا، حیران تھے زائران حسینی کہ کیا ہے آج، کیوں زلزلے میں خبر شہ کربلا ہے آج، محشر میاں گنجے شہیداں بپا ہے آج، آتی ہے یہ صدا ہمیں صدمہ بڑا ہے آج، زخمی بدن کو میرے عدو نے ہلا دیا، پوتے کو میرے زہر ہلا، پوتے کو میرے زہر ہلا دیا، حیرت سے کیوں زمیں پہ نہ عرش اولا گرا، اس ظلم سے امام مشکل کشا گرا، عباسیوں پہ کیوں نہ فلک جا بجا گرا، بالائے خاک تاج رسول خدا گرا، سر اپنا کھولے سوگ میں آل رسول نے، جنت میں سر سے پھینک دی چادر بطول، سر سے پھینک دی چادر بطول نے، لکھا ہے جب امام ہوئے اعظم جناں، ایک دفعہ سا میرے میں قیامت ہوئی عیاں، دولت سرائے شاہ سے آنے لگی فغاں، لو مومنو یتیم ہوئے صاحب الزماں، سرگرم ظلم چاروں طرف بدخصال ہیں، اور حیف ہے کہ میں دیے دیں خود خصال، اور حیف ہے کہ میں دیے دیں خود وصال، سایانہ باپ کا نہ کوئی بھائی ساتھ ہے، سر پر امام عصر کے بس حق کی ذات ہے، اس بے پدر کے سمت کسے التفات ہے، اب شرم اہل بیت کی زہرا کے ہاتھ ہے، مردے کے گرد شور جو نوحہ کا ہوتا ہے، معصوم پھوٹ پھوٹ کے بابا کو، معصوم پھوٹ پھوٹ کے بابا کو، اب اس طرح سے اہل خبر کرتے ہیں بیان، ماتم سرا میں بیبیاں کرتی تھی یہ فغاں، نہلا چکے جو لاشے مولا دو جہاں، کفنایا اس کو رختے مطہر کے درمیاں، آواز آئی فاطمہ کے شور و شین کی، سب شیعہ روئے بے کفنی پر حسین، سب شیعہ آواز آئی فاطمہ کے شور و شین کی، سب شیعہ روئے بے کفنی پر حسین، سب شیعہ روئے بے کفنی پر حسین کی صلوات، جزاک اللہ السلام محمد۔
بلند سلوات
صحیح، بالکل صحیح، محمد Allahu Akbar. Ya Rasulullah. Ya Ali. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. رحم الله من يقرأ سورة الفاتحة. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ربي اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. الحمد لله رب العالمين، ثم الصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب إله العالمين أبي القاسم محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين، واللعنة على أعدائهم أجمعين من الآن إلى قيام يوم الدين. أما بعد، فقد قال إمامنا محمد الباقر: إن لقتل جدي الحسين في قلوب المؤمنين حرارة لن تبرد أبدا. صدق مولانا إمام الباقر عليه السلام. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. صلى على محمد وآل. Your second salawat for love of Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad. And your loudest salawat for ta'jil faraj sahib al-asr wa zaman. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa Ali. Respected elders, brothers and sisters, we've come to the conclusion of these nights of Aza. And we have these three gatherings together tonight, tomorrow night, the shahadat of our 11th Imam, and Sunday night, the Eid of Sayyidah Zahra, as it's known. Tonight's conversation, while the youth are present, mashallah, the discussion is pertaining to a relevant conversation that is the zubda, is the conclusion of these Ayyam-e-Aza. So as we proceed through these Ayyam-e-Aza, there are points that come clear and become apparent that are needed to be discussed, and we go through the process of having these discussions. As such, tonight's conversation, which is the conclusion of these, is 5 important question and answers about the waqi' of Karbala. That through these events, what has been known is that there are some questions and some inclarities that exist around what happened in Karbala and why Karbala took place it did. And the brevity's sake, we'll mention 5 questions pertaining to that event tonight, and an explanation so as to increase our understanding of the waqi' of Karbala. This hadith that we began our majlis with is a hadith from our 5th Imam, which has a very similar hadith that's narrated by our Holy Prophet as well too, where the Prophet and the Imam make a statement that certainly for the killing of Imam Hussein, in the hearts of the believers, hararatun lan tabrud abada. Now, if we translate this statement literally, it means hararatun, heat, lan tabrud abada, that will never become cold. But there's a poetic use of the language, and this is where we find some of the reason why these conversations need to exist. That sometimes when we look at the source material, it's translated, it's presented, but the hidden meaning behind it is not clear. So when the Imam, for example, or the Prophet, for example, makes the statement of hararatun, he doesn't mean heat. Heat is the conclusion. The references to the effect. Poetically, they're saying the effect, but they mean the cause, meaning that there's a fire that produces this heat in the hearts of the mu'mineen. How does this exist? It exists through the process of knowing and having ma'rifah about the waqi' of Karbala, spending the time to learn about the events of Karbala, spending and investing time to know about what happened then. The majlis is something to remember, is always to remember, is an introduction to a topic. It is not the entire topic. So for example, there are events that are associated with history that don't come from the mimbar, because the mimbar's place is not to be, for example, an exhaustive history class. The mimbar does many things simultaneously. Sometimes it's teaching history, sometimes it's teaching aqaid, sometimes it's teaching akhlaq, sometimes it's teaching tarbiyah. All of these elements that come into one position, the minbar itself is not focused on one goal. It has many things it has to teach and responsibilities to provide. So there are things that may be missing that the minbar doesn't provide to us that we have to invest time in to learn. And this is where we come to the conclusion that there's a fire in the hearts of the mu'mineen because we make an investment. So for our next generation, for our youth, we have to make this investment to be able to answer some of these questions. Otherwise, we may believe that everything the Imam did is right, but we may question, why did the Imam do this? Why did the Imam do that? I'm sure he did it right, but I don't understand why. So these points are something to spend time in and invest in, to learn about, to build a better relationship with my Imam, and to keep that fire and love of Imam Hussein alive in our hearts. With this, the most I will ask from you is 5 salawat, one for each of these questions. So our first question, Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Sallu ala Muhammad. Why did Imam Hussein go to Kufa? When we look at history, we say that the Imam could have gone anywhere, but he chose to go to Kufa. The reason why the Imam goes to Kufa is that Kufa had not just invited the Imam for the first time when the Imam leaves for Kufa. Kufa, if you remember, was the capital, the city of the capital of when Imam Ali was the Khalifa. And after the Shahadat of Imam Ali, Imam Hassan took the Khilafat for a period of 6 months. After that period of 6 months, Imam abdicated, created peace, and abdicated the throne, the Khilafat. We call it a throne because that's what it was. When the Imam abdicates, Muawiyah takes over. And as soon as Muawiyah takes over, the treaty that Imam Hassan signs explains and says that the Khilafat after Muawiyah will return to Ahlul Bayt. The people of Kufa had been very unhappy with the Khilafat of Muawiyah. They had been abused. They wanted to have a change in power and authority as quickly as possible. So first they invited Imam Hassan to break his treaty, and Imam Hassan refused. Then after the Shahadat of Imam Hassan, they started inviting Imam Hussein. And they started inviting him for a period of 10 years. During the Imamat of Imam Hussein, the people of Kufa would constantly call to the Imam to ask him to come and lead the Khilafat and to start an uprising against the Banu Umayyah. And the Imam always refused, saying that, no, my brother made a treaty, I will honor the treaty. But after the Shahadat of Imam Hassan, now the death of Muawiyah takes place, and the Khilafat is to return to Imam Hussein, and it is his right, and the Muslimin know of this treaty. The only ones who stood up for that right were the people of Kufa, who said, Imam, our call to you is still true, come and we will support your call. When the people of Kufa began to call to the Imam, and the Imam sent Muslim ibn Aqil to verify the call and then to go, the response from Muslim ibn Aqil is critical to understand. That Muslim writes that there are hundreds of thousands or thousands of swords ready in your service, come to the city of Kufa. Meaning that the call of the people of Kufa has been authenticated. That if one was to look at history, history would show the people of Kufa called, the Imam accepted, and the Imam proceeded. If the Imam had made the intention to go anywhere but Kufa, it would have been shown that the Imam was self-interested. He wanted to preserve himself. He was looking for his own authority. He was looking to take care of his own life and his family. He was seeking asylum away from the direction and sight of people. That the Imam going anywhere other than where people are making a call to haqq, that they said, Yabna Rasulullah, you have haqq. You have a treaty in your favor. You have authority. They are abusing your rights. We will stand in support of you. Then the Imam's obligation becomes to fulfill the call to justice and to proceed in that direction. So the options of, for example, seeking sanctuary in, for example, Yemen, seeking sanctuary in the northern frontiers, seeking sanctuary in the places where there were Shia who loved Ahlul Bayt, to seek sanctuary was not the Imam's purpose. The Imam's purpose was not to hide from the Khalifa. The Imam's purpose was to stand up in front of the Khalifa. He needed someone who would stand by his right, and these were the only people who claimed to stand by his right. Now you may see that when Imam proceeds to Kufa, then the question is that the people stand against him in war. Why didn't the Imam just leave at this point in time? You see, if, for example, entire city calls to you and some people oppose you, the claim would be made that you ran away from the threat as opposed to fulfilling the call. Which is why the Imam shows them the letters that they have written, the enemies themselves have written, and he says, if you don't want this, then relieve me of my commitment to you. Let me go. pull back, take away your offer from me. But the confusing effect was that the people of Kufa did not take the offer back, nor did they send the Imam free, nor did they stop fighting the Imam. So when we look at history, part of the thing that we look in history is that the Imam is completely justified and his actions are perfect. His actions are perfect because whether one looks at it from a political aspect or looks at it from a personal aspect, a person can say that none of the actions of the Imam were in self-interest. He knew that there was a risk that these people may harm him, but he also knew that they were the only people willing who had called to him, and he had authenticated the call that they are willing to stand up against the usurper of authority and support the righteous ruler of Islam. And that even when they threatened him, he did not run away from the threat. He said, either alleviate me from the commitment that I have made and that we have made to one another, or support me. In this way, the Imam is completely faultless to say that no one can say anything the Imam did was in self-interest. Which brings us to our second question. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Did the Shia kill Imam Hussein? This is a very common claim that's made through various people that say that, oh, you Shia, oh, you Madhab-e Ja'fari, cry for Imam Hussein, yet you are the people of Kufa and you are the ones who killed the Imam. Anyone who makes this kind of type of claim is actually ignorant of what happens in history. That history tells us what was the composition of these people. First and foremost, we take a look and we see, let's go back to the moment where Imam Hassan takes the Khilafat. When Imam Hassan takes the Khilafat, he inherits an army that was being built by Imam Ali to fight Muawiyah on the frontiers. After the battle of Siffin, the Khilafat of Imam Ali fought 3 battles. The battle of Jamal, the battle of Siffin, and the battle of Nahrawan. The battle of Siffin is one of, if not the bloodiest civil war in the history of Islam. And it's an inconclusive battle, that they forced Imam Ali into a peace treaty at the end of this battle. And the consequence of this battle was the creation of the Khawarij. That the Khawarij were those people who betrayed Imam Ali. They took bribes from Muawiyah, and Muawiyah promised them, he said, listen, get Ali to come to a peace treaty, I will give you a great amount of wealth. Khawarij said, okay, we'll do that. They forced Imam Ali into a peace treaty at the end of Battle of Siffin. Imam Ali goes to the peace treaty. These Khawarij, they go to Muawiyah and they say, okay, give us our money. Muawiyah says, what money? I'm not going to give you anything. They said, but you promised us. Muawiyah says, and who's going to help you now? I'm not going to give it to you. Are you going to go to Ali ibn Abi Talib and tell him that you betrayed him for money from me? You think he's going to help you get the money out of me? No one's going to help you get out of here. So these Khawarij turned back to Imam Ali and said, now we want to kill Muawiyah. And Imam Ali says, no, I can't fight him again. We made a treaty. So they said, fine, we don't accept you, we don't accept Muawiyah, we accept no one. None of you have the right to rule. And this is where the Khawarij established themselves, that they accepted the rule of nobody. Because in their own self-interest, they had turned against Imam Ali and Muawiyah had betrayed them. So they were not willing to support anybody. These remnants of the Khawarij are the ones that joined the army of Imam Hassan. So that they decided they didn't care about Imam Hassan. They didn't want to support the Imam. They only wanted to fight Muawiyah for the betrayal that they had given him. So they had made a pact within themselves that we will fight for Hassan, but if Hassan refuses to fight, we'll kill him. Which is why you saw when Imam Hassan takes the Khilafat in the first 6 months when he intends to make the peace treaty, they attacked and wounded Imam Hassan in the battlefield. His own soldiers wounded him. These were the people of Kufa. Now when Muawiyah takes over and he becomes the Khalifa, history itself tells us, but intellectually, let's look at this, that Muawiyah becomes the Khalifa. The seat of authority of his enemy and predecessor was the city of Kufa. Would you leave the people of Kufa alone? No, because they'll raise another army against you. Muawiyah, when he takes the Khilafat, the first thing that he does is he takes all of the clans and families that were loyal to Ahlul Bayt and moves them out of Kufa around the Muslim empire and away from Kufa. Because he says, if I leave them here, they're going to fight me again. So he says, I need to avoid this. So he moves all of the Shia clans away from the city of Kufa except for few. How we know this is true, there are 2 events in history. One, when you take a look and you see at the Waqi' of Karbala, there were people coming from Khurasan and Tus to help Imam Hussein. How did those people know about the cause of Imam Hussein? Why did they love Imam Hussein? Because they were the actual people of Kufa whom Muawiyah had kicked out of Kufa and moved them out so that that center power of lovers of Ahlul Bayt was dispersed and broken. The other thing, when we take a look at the life of our eighth Imam, Ali ibn Musa al-Rida alayhi salam, when the Imam leaves Medina and heads to Khurasan, heads to Tus, you see along the way, there are gatherings of the Shia who come to meet the Imam. And we talk about this. How did those Shia get there? Those Shia got there because their clans had been removed from the lovers of Ahlul Bayt in Kufa and moved around the entire empire of Islam. Muawiyah then, when he removed these soldiers, because Kufa was a garrison, was a military town, he had to replace those soldiers, so he replaced them with mercenaries. He replaced them with clans that were loyal to wealth, that as long as he paid them, they would fight for him. Then during his khilafat of 20 years, he abused these people. He didn't treat them well. He didn't pay them. So these mercenary clans realized and learned that the people of Kufa talk about the time when the Ahlul Bayt were in charge, when Imam Ali was in charge, and how good the people had it in the city of Kufa. In the interest of returning that, and the fact that Muawiyah wasn't taking care of them, they called to Imam Hussein and said, "Come, let us reestablish this." Those who were willing to fight for Imam Hussein initially and then were bought by Umar Sa'd again and brought back to the army of Yazid were mercenaries. They were people who were interested in money. They weren't the Shia of Ahlul Bayt. They weren't the people who loved Ahlul Bayt. They weren't the supporters of Ahlul Bayt. Why? Because the supporters of Ahlul Bayt, had they been left in Kufa and Muawiyah abused them, they would have uprised again against Muawiyah, and he didn't want that to happen. Which is why, when we look at history, we can tell that those who fought against Imam Hussein, they call to Imam Hussein, but not in the interest that they believed in the wilaya and the authority of the Imam, but rather they looked for anyone who would treat them better than Muawiyah was treating them. Which is why, as soon as Yazid offers them money and wealth, they turn against the call to Imam Hussein and they say, he's willing to pay us, we'll fight for him. And this entire process begins. Now that doesn't mean that there were no Shia in the city of Kufa at this point, not at all. Rather, what we take a look, when Ubaidullah ibn Ziyad takes control of the city of Kufa, he imprisons at the time of the Waqia of Karbala, in some narrations, between 12 and 15,000 people and soldiers who were loyal to Imam Hussein, to prevent them from being able to go to the Imam. The entire structure of what Ubaidullah ibn Ziyad does in Kufa is strategy. It's very well executed strategy. From the way he breaks the support of Muslim ibn Aqil, if you take a look in the way he breaks the support of Muslim ibn Aqil, he doesn't speak to the soldiers that are present with Muslim ibn Aqil. When you look at the waqia of Hazrat Muslim, and Hazrat Muslim, his character, he's وَمَا أَدْرَاكَ مَا الْمُسْلِمِ. How can we explain what is Hazrat Muslim? But it's aside from the topic. But Ubaidullah, what he does is when Hazrat Muslim ibn Aqil gathers in front of the palace to overthrow the governor, he has 18,000 soldiers with him. Ubaidullah doesn't speak to those 18,000 soldiers. He takes the few men that he has, gives them an alam, and sends them out to the mahalla of each of the tribes. And the caller stands with the flag in the mahalla. Who's in the mahalla now? The old people, the women, the children, the daughters. And this caller calls out and he says, Yazid, the Khalifa, has sent an army that is coming. Anyone who seeks protection under this flag, their wealth will be safe, their children will be safe. Anyone who refuses to seek protection under this flag now, he will be killed by the army of Yazid, his wealth will be taken, his children will be imprisoned, and his house will be destroyed. The women are the ones who went to the palace, then went to the governor's palace and said to the soldiers supporting Muslim ibn Aqil, the women, they said, Muslim has 18,000 soldiers. Why do you need to sacrifice your life? What's going to happen if you get killed? Who's going to take care of us? And the women take the men and they bring them back. Until eventually it comes to a point where instead of saying Muslim has 18,000 soldiers, why do you have to risk your life? To where they started saying Muslim only has 8,000 soldiers. You're going to get killed. You can't overcome the army of Yazid. Muslim only has 5,000 soldiers. Muslim only has 2,000 soldiers. Until we read in history that the strategy of Ubaidullah was such that not even one soldier was willing to fight with Muslim ibn Aqil. These soldiers were the mercenaries. They weren't true lovers of Ahlul Bayt. The true lovers of Ahlul Bayt, we saw their example in the field of Karbala. That though they were 72, they were not satisfied without shahadat. Ubaidullah had removed the pure ones and left these people out there that he could turn by threatening them and frightening them. So when we take a look and we see who was it that fought against Imam Hussein in Karbala, read history. Anyone who tells you it was the Shia is ignorant of history, because history will tell you the tactics and strategy of Muawiyah as soon as he took the Khilafat. Listen to his speech in Masjid-e-Kufa as he takes the Khilafat away. He says, I did not become your ruler to teach you to pray and fast. I became the authority over you to rule over you and to be your king. And that is my goal. And that's exactly what his intention was, and that's why he couldn't leave this seat of lovers of Ahlul Bayt there. Now, this is a longer discussion about the strategy and the history of what happens in the city of Kufa and how Imam Hassan intended to protect these people through his peace treaty and how Muawiyah violated every single one of the clauses of the peace treaty. But we go on to our third question. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Sallu ala Muhammad. Looking at the severity of the situation in Karbala, Imam Hussein comes to the realization that an army of what is reported as 30,000 stands in front of him. And he has less than 150 followers with him. The Imam persisting in this situation, the question that's asked is, did the Imam commit suicide? And sometimes this term is incorrectly used to describe that if the Imam did something, na'uzu billah, haram. Or because the Imam did it, is it jais? First and foremost is, what is suicide? Suicide is something that is an individual taking their own life. This is haram in the religion of Islam. Now, everybody's okay? We're going to take it aside for a minute. Everybody's all right? Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Sallu ala Muhammad wa. Suicide is haram. It is haram. It is a major sin. However, it does not cast someone out of the religion of Islam. One of the questions that sometimes comes up is, na'uzu billah, that God forbid someone commits suicide. But they are still entitled to all of the rights of Islam and Muslimin. To take part in their janazah, still a responsibility. Ghusl and kafan, still a responsibility. Dafan, responsibility. Salat al-Mayt, responsibility. It is their right and an obligation for Muslimin to execute this responsibility. Why? Because though that person has committed a sin, they are not out of the religion of Islam. Imagine that, na'uzubillah, it's a bad sin, but you're still a Muslim and you still have the rights of Islam and Muslimin. Imagine that for any sin that we commit, we said, no, this is not a Muslim anymore. That's not possible. The discussion around this is a very detailed discussion with a lot of research that's now available on the concept of what is suicide and how it is viewed in Islam, but it doesn't cast someone out of the religion of Islam. But what the Imam does in Karbala is not suicide. Suicide is both haram conceptually as well as literally from the Quran, where Allah in the Quran says, وَلَا تَلْقُوا بِأَيْدِيَكُمْ إِلَى التَّهْلُكَةِ. Allah says in the Quran that it is not permissible for anyone to cast themselves into destruction by their own hands. The Imam will never do anything that is against the Quran. Further to that, the Imam did not have a desire or an intention to be killed, nor did any decision he make was with the intention that he should be killed. Rather, the Imam worked to preserve his life in every instance. An Imam is not like you and I in the aspect that when you and I make a decision, we look at what's in my best interest. For example, when we think of a career, we think of, where am I going to make money? How much money will I make? One of the important things that we do need to think about is, as we make this decision of what we do in our life, is, what does Islam want from me? What does Islam need? An Imam is someone who thinks about what Islam needs before he thinks about what he needs. That aspect of the Imam, of the responsibility of looking at what Islam needs before his personality gets involved, is an important aspect of understanding, what does an Imam do? When we understand this concept, we see that the Imam's personality doesn't affect his decision. One of the mistakes that some historians, non-lovers of Ahlul Bayt, when they write the history of Karbala, they decide and they say in history that yes, na'uzu billah, Imam Hassan was not someone who could fight, therefore he made peace. And Imam Hussein was someone who loved war, and this is why he fought. This is not true. An imam, when he has a responsibility to fulfill, his personality doesn't affect that responsibility. Which is why one of the famous quotes that our ulama make is that if Imam Hussein had been in the time of Imam Sadiq, and Imam Sadiq had been in the time of Imam Hussein would have been the teacher, and Imam Sadiq would have been the shaheed. Meaning that the imam does what Islam needs at that time to preserve the religion, not what the imam desires. All of the actions of Imam Hussein were with the intention of preserving the religion of Islam through this difficulty, that Islam had to persist. Islam had to remain. And the most important thing, rather than looking at his own sacrifices and what he was losing, the imam looks at what will keep Islam alive. And this is why the approach of the imam on the day of Ashura, look and see that the imam begins his conversation on the day of Ashura with speeches. Imam doesn't immediately proceed to battle. The imam proceeds by making speeches to the army. They said that the first approach of Imam Hussein to the army of Umar Sa'd is on a camel. In the tradition of the Arab, when one rides a camel, they intend peace. When one rides a horse, they intend war. That even in that instance, the imam was bringing people and inviting them to hidayah. The people were the one who were refusing to listen. The first speech of Imam Hussein on the day of Ashura, when the imam stands in front of the army, sits on his camel and proceeds to preach to them, they said that the army of Umar Sa'd started to clang their armor in such volumes that people could not hear the message of the imam. Because they were interested not in listening to the message of hidayah, but somehow seeking the reward and wealth that was offered to them. This is where the imam makes a statement at the end of his speech that you cannot hear my words because your stomachs are full of haram. Now this statement of the imam doesn't mean that literally they were eating haram animals or they were eating pig or something like that. No. The haram the imam is speaking about is that their stomachs are filled with inappropriate wealth. That their stomachs are filled with that haram that they've taken, that wealth that they've taken from the Khalifa, that unjust money against the imam that they've taken in the interest of providing for themselves. Which brings us to a very important question as well too, that the same way when I think of a career, I should think about what is the need of Islam the same way as I think about what is my need. But similarly, think about when I'm making money, am I sure this money is halal? Am I filling my stomach with haram? Am I conscious that this money that I make, this business that I do, these transactions that I have, this source that I have, is this permissible? Because it impacts one's ability to listen to the hidayah from Allah, which is why those people couldn't hear the message of the imam. But the imam at no point in time, nothing that the imam does in that entire day of Karbala is with the intention that, okay, people come and kill me. No, the imam preserves his life. Takes the responsibility to ensure that he is calling to guidance, takes the responsibility to ensure that he is fulfilling his obligation. Which brings us to the fourth of our questions. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Sallu ala Muhammad. What was the strategy of Imam Hussein in Karbala? There's a discussion sometimes that says that the imam could have killed everyone, or the imam tried to kill everyone. It's not the case. First off, the imam is victorious with what his intention and strategy was on the day of Karbala. The question is, what was that strategy? Remember something, an imam is a source of hidayah, is a source of guidance. An imam's purpose is always to bring people to the path of Allah. The same way our holy prophet Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, his goal was not to kill people either. His goal was to bring people to hidayah. The greatest example of the prophet's goal being hidayah is how he conquers the city of Mecca. A city of enemies who try to kill our prophet captures them and converts them to Islam without killing anyone. Though he has the right, though they are open enemies, though they have attempted on his life, they abused him For 13 years they abused him, and the Prophet, in the right to take vengeance, what does he do? Forgives them all. When we call our Prophet Rahmatul lil Alameen, it's because our Prophet never looked at the concept of vengeance being his goal, or abuse being his goal, or subjugation being his goal. His goal was hidayah and guidance. The same is true of Imam Hussein in Karbala. That the Imam's goal was to establish a source of guidance for humanity and invite people to guidance. And the Imam succeeds. If the Imam's goal had been to kill the enemies, could he have not killed them? Of course he could have killed them. There are a number of things that point to this aspect that the Imam's strategy was to provide hidayah. From the one aspect, we take a look and we see that first and foremost, the battle almost takes place on the 9th of Muharram. On Taswa, as it's known, the army of Umar-e-Sa'd in the afternoon attacks and rushes the tents of Imam Hussein on the 9th of Muharram. Imam Hussein, Hazrat Abbas, they proceed out of the tents and they ask Umar-e-Sa'd, what is your intention? Why are you doing this? Umar-e-Sa'd says, the affair has been decided and there will be war between us. Imam Hussein says, give us one night for ibadat of Allah, and then we will proceed to the battle in the morning. The intention of this night is for ibadat of Allah, but it's also a night in which the Imam prepares for the oncoming of war. The Imam's goal is to have a defensive strategy to prevent his women and children and to prevent his people from being overrun. Now, an army of 30,000 versus an army or a group of people of 150 people. The first thing the Imam does is he takes the tents. Now, tents, while being the norm of living in Arabia, don't give much in terms of privacy. I mean, you can't see the other person, but if you stand outside of the tent, you can hear the other person. So it doesn't give much privacy, which is why in the dastur of the Arab, in the culture of the Arab, when you take tents and you even travel in a group, you separate them and you put them at a distance and away from each other so that the people inside of the tent have some privacy. The Imam, when he knows that this attack is coming, brings all of his tents in and he creates two rings. He creates an outer ring of tents where the pegs of the tents overlap so that none of the horses can rush into the camp. And he creates a barrier on the outside. And then he creates a smaller ring of tents on the inside where all of the people will stay. The next thing the Imam does is he digs a trench behind the tents. And when he digs the trench behind the tents, he fills it with firewood. The intention is that an army of 30,000 can easily overrun such a small camp. The Imam wants to restrict this entire army from being able to approach from wherever they want and limit the army's approach to only in front from the front. So which is why the Imam lays this firewood in the back, and the morning of Ashura, the Imam goes to light this firewood. There's a narration that happens that it says that as Imam Hussein proceeded with Muslim ibn Awsaja to light this fire in the back, at the same time, Mal'un Shimr had come around from behind to see if there was some way that he could sneak in and attack from behind. And that as Imam Hussein lights the fire, Shimr comes close and being frustrated now that he can't attack the camp of Imam Hussein from behind, he calls out and he says, "Oh Hussein, have you lit a fire for yourself in this world before the fire of Jahannam?" Muslim ibn Awsaja is a pious man. He looks to Imam Hussein and he says, "Yabna Rasulullah, I'm a very good archer. Give me permission, one arrow, and I will drop him right here." And Imam Hussein says that while he is an evil man, I don't like that I should be the one who starts the fighting. And he prevents Muslim ibn Awsaja from attacking Shimr Mal'un in this moment for the disrespect he has committed against the Imam. The goal of the Imam was a defensive battle, to keep inviting to hidayah and guidance and preserving his life and his family and his community that is with him in that instance. Which is why there are certain things the Imam does on the day of Ashura that give us this instruction. One, he creates a barrier in a defensive position that the army only has one approach. Had, na'uzubillah, the Imam's intention been, "Come kill me," na'uzubillah, then what was the point of creating a defensive position? What was the point of defending and preserving his life? Another thing that we see is the day of Ashura is the way that the Imam structures his soldiers. The greatest power the Imam possesses, if we were to say that the Imam's intention was to kill as many of them as possible, The greatest power that Imam possesses is Hazrat Abbas. There's a poetic statement that says that the night before Ashura, Abu al-Fadl sits with Ali al-Akbar and has a discussion. He says, "Oh Akbar, let's split the army into 3 pieces. 1 piece I will take, 1 piece you take, 1 piece the companions will take. I will finish my share of the army and I will join you, and then we will continue and proceed and remove the rest of this army, but that we will wipe these people out before our master is even disturbed." Meaning that even if we look at the shuja'at of Abu al-Fadl, to understand how great of a soldier Abu al-Fadl was, you have to understand what was his equivalent. When the battle on the day of Ashura begins, there's a moment where 10 soldiers of Imam Hussein are overcome and they're entrapped by the army of Umar Asad. Where 10 soldiers couldn't get out, Imam Hussein sent this one, Hazrat Abbas, and he brought the 10 soldiers back. The argument could be made that one Abbas is greater than 10 soldiers. What 10 couldn't do, Abu al-Fadl could do. The second point we take a look at and we see is that when Imam sends Hazrat Abbas to collect water, it is noted that there are 4,000 men blocking the river of Furat. Yet one Hazrat Abbas can break the rank of 4,000 men and they can't stop him. Because history knows Abu al-Fadl did take the water. You would say that Abu al-Fadl is greater than 4,000 men. But understand something, this isn't the status and the ma'rifat of Hazrat Abbas. When we look on the day of Ashura and we see that Imam Hussein enters the battlefield every time one of his companions falls, one of his children falls, how does the Imam have the ability to do that and to know that the army won't turn and attack his tents? It's because that entire army of 30,000 feared this one Abbas that Imam had made a commander and stood in front of the tents. That the greatest power that the Imam possessed was this one man who 30,000 men were afraid of. In some of the maqatil it's noted that Abu al-Fadl would stand there as the soldiers of Imam Hussein would fall and he would call out to the enemies, "O enemies of Allah, O enemies of Rasulullah, you kill our children, you kill our companions, you kill our friends, but Abbas is here, but you don't come to Abbas." Meaning the whole army was afraid of this one Hazrat Abbas. If the intention of the Imam was to wreak havoc and to kill as many of them as possible, the first thing he would have done is sent this Abu al-Fadl out into the battlefield. But the fact that the Imam doesn't, and the only permission that Hazrat Abbas gets is to go and collect water, is to demonstrate and show to the world and humanity that the goal of Imam Hussein was not massacre and warfare. The goal of the Imam in every instance of this war was to somehow call these people to hidayah and leave a call to justice in history that till today people come to the religion of Islam by hearing about the purity of the sacrifice for the sake of Allah of Imam Hussein. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala. Sallu ala Muhammad. An Imam is perfection in everything that he chooses to perform. A proof of this we can see is that in the life of our 5th Imam, when he was called to the city of Shab, the Khalifa was out playing sports with his companions and doing archery. The Khalifa looks at our 5th Imam and he imagines that the 5th Imam is an intellectual. What ability would he have in archery? So he pushes the Imam and he says, "Please join us. We'd like to see your ability. Do you have any ability in archery?" The Imam says, "Leave this from me." Khalifa insists. The Imam says, "Leave it from me." The 3rd time he insists, the Imam says, "Okay." He picks up the bow and arrow and our 5th Imam proceeds to hit the dead center of the bullseye. Then he takes the next arrow and he splits the arrow that is in the bullseye with the 2nd arrow. Then he takes the 3rd arrow. He shoots the 3rd arrow and splits the first 2 arrows in the middle of the bullseye until the Khalifa himself says, "Bas, stop. Okay. You have shown us what you..." Meaning an Imam does perfect in everything he intends. If the Imam's victory was on the basis of decimating the army of Umar Asad, there was nothing that could have stopped the Imam from achieving his goal. Which tells us the fact that if that army is not decimated by Imam Hussein, his goal was not the murder of these people or the killing of these people. His goal was to bring a message of hidayah. Which is why throughout the entire event of Karbala, you hear the Imam inviting these people to peace and justice. His taking of Ali al-Asghar into the battlefield was a demonstration that the Imam's interest was peace. That he chose to bring an example in front of the army, that he brings the 6-month-old child and he asks them for water. But look at the beauty of the example. The Imam says, if your goal is that none of my family should remain alive, this son of mine has been thirsty for 3 days. A child of 6 months who has not drank for 3 days will definitely die. I'm only asking you that you let him not die thirsty. What happens? The army of Umar Sa'd splits into two. Some of them say, give the child water. Our goal is achieved. What's the problem? The others came forward and they said that even this one, in this condition, we will not give him water. And the army begins to fight. Our goal is achieved. Then why are we being so abusive? Why are we being so harsh? And the other said, no, we have to be this harsh. The intention of this army and the intention of the Imam is to make peace. So he invites through every one of his sacrifices to the process of hidayah and guidance, that come back to guidance, come back to the right path. He establishes an example that till today, no one can question the intention of the Imam of why he did what he did. That his goal was to bring humanity back to the right path. Which brings us to our fifth question. What was the strategy of the army of Umar Sa'd on the day of Ashura? Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali. Allahu Akbar. Ya Rasulullah. Ya Ali. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali. Chala thak to nahi gaye, but I need 10 minutes. 10 minutes is all I need. What was the strategy of Umar Sa'd's army? One of the important things to remember is that Karbala is not the first battle that took place in the history of the Arab. The Arab had a tradition of warfare. Why? There are two things that Arabs are famous for: war and romantic poetry. Meaning that war had an etiquette that was attached to it. There was a way of fighting war. The way it's recorded and what we know happened in Karbala is because there was a tradition and a structure of how war was done. That there was a technique to this, and there was an etiquette and a mannerism to the art of warfare. In this mannerism and etiquette of warfare is the aspect of, for example, that there is one-on-one combat before the armies clash. And in that one-on-one warfare, each of the soldiers that enters the battlefield recites a rajz, or an introduction of who he is, so that his greatness and his status and his family can receive the reward of the efforts of the bravery that the soldier makes in the battlefield. Meaning that the idea that we know who was in Karbala is not unusual to us. As a matter of fact, taking a quick aside, there's only one soldier from the soldiers of Imam Hussein who we don't know who he was. Till this day we don't know. One of the young men who enters into the battlefield on the day of Ashura, he recites a rajz. He recites poetry to introduce himself. And the historians note the poetry. But this young man, the poetry he recites, introduces himself as being the servant of Imam Hussein. He never says his own name. He says, I am the servant of Hussein, and what a great master is Hussein. He is the grandson of Rasulullah. He is the master of humanity, and I am nothing but the slave of Hussein. Meaning, look at the purity of this young man, that if he was entitled to some level of bravery and reward and acknowledgement to society, he says, there is nothing that is for me. Everything is for my master. But other than that, all the soldiers, they make their introduction. They tell the people who we are. The rajz of each of these soldiers of Imam Hussein is preserved in history. The rajz of Ali al-Akbar. The rajz and the poetry of Abu al-Fadl as he battles through the battlefield, as he goes to proceed. All these things are noted. Meaning there was an etiquette of warfare. And the etiquette of warfare had been refined by the coming of Islam. that when Islam came, there were a number of things that were even made more clear. One was the impermissibility and the hurma of the desecration of the deceased. The perfection of this example was established in the Battle of Khandaq. In the Battle of Ahzab, or Khandaq as it's known, when Amr ibn Wood enters into the camp of our Prophet, and he stands there to fight, and everyone refuses to go fight except for Imam Ali. Imam Ali goes and he defeats Amr ibn Abdul. And we know this defeat is a flawless victory in which the Imam completely decimates a champion who was supposed to be much better than him. But one of the amazing things that the Imam does is he doesn't loot the body of Amr ibn Abdul. When he doesn't loot the body of this enemy of Allah, the sister of Amr, when she comes to collect her brother from the battlefield, recites the poetry of the akhlaq of Amir al-Mu'mineen. To say that how great is this champion who gives honor and dignity to his enemy. How great is this champion who, when he defeats my brother, treats my brother better than my brother ever treated anybody. Ya Ali. Meaning the definition of akhlaq in battle and warfare was established and improved by the coming of Islam. That fight in wars, fight in battles, but do not desecrate, do not abuse, do not cause harm, do not approach the women, do not harm the children. All of the rules of warfare that the Arab had appreciated, Rasulullah came refined and cleaned to make sure that there was an akhlaq and an etiquette that if you are a Muslim, you fight like a Muslim. That Islam doesn't just affect our cleanliness in our society, but even our enemy benefits from the religion of Islam. But all of this was put aside in the Battle of Karbala. The way that the army of Umar Asad fights in the Battle of Karbala is with complete disregard to all of the rules that Islam established for warfare. That the goal and the strategy of Umar Asad is to cause as much harm and abuse to Imam Hussein and his followers as physically possible. They violated every rule. We can take a look at this in a number of examples. One is even when the companions go out to fight, one of the first of the companions that goes out to fight is a person by the name known as Wahab al-Kalbi. Wahab al-Kalbi was a Christian man who was traveling with his mother and his new bride when he came upon the encampment of Imam Hussein, and he went to ask of the story of Imam Hussein, and when he found that the Imam was in difficulty and enemies had gathered against him, Wahab comes back to his mother and his wife, and he says, I have found the grandson of the Prophet in this condition, what do you suggest we do? The wife of Wahab al-Kalbi says, this isn't our fight, let's go. The mother of Wahab al-Kalbi comes forward and says, ignore her. This is the grandson of a prophet, assist him. And Wahab al-Kalbi becomes an assistant of the Imam. The story of Wahab is very interesting. Wahab, on the day of Ashura, when the initial armies, when they stand in front of each other, a soldier comes forward and calls for an adversary from the army of Imam Hussein, and Wahab steps forward and he says, I'll go fight. And Imam Hussein says to him, you are a good match for him, go and fight. Wahab goes to fight in this one-on-one battle. He kills his enemy, but in the process, 2 of his fingers from his hand are cut. Wahab returns from this skirmish victorious. It's said that as Wahab comes back, his wife comes running out of the tent. She says, Wahab, why have you come back to me alive? Go and fight. Wahab says, woman, first you tell me not to go fight. Now you're upset with me that I'm coming back alive. What's wrong with you? She says, that was my mistake before I saw how alone Hussein ibn Ali was. She becomes an ardent supporter of the Imam and insists on Wahab to go fight, and Wahab eventually fights and is killed in the battlefield. When they kill Wahab, they desecrate his body. One of the assumptions of his desecration in the beginning was that he's a Christian, or he was a Christian. He was known as a Christian, not as a Muslim. That to desecrate him is not outside of the rules of Islam. They took the head of Wahab and they threw it at the mother of Wahab. They describe and say that this was an intention of abuse, and they did this with many of the shuhada, that they would take the heads and throw it to the women. And they describe and say that Wahab's mother picks up the head in the field of Karbala, and that as she sits crying, holding the head of her son, they struck her on the head and killed her in the battlefield as well. The intention was disrespect, was abuse. When you see and hear about some of the events in Karbala, they were not the normal process of warfare. When you hear about, for example, Hazrat Qasim entering the battlefield, Qasim is one of 4 sons of Imam Hassan who fought, who were present in the field of Karbala, 3 of whom attained Shahadat. We only mention one because his Shahadat is something different. That first and foremost, you see how severe the situation was on the Imam, because when they describe Qasim, they say, Ma balagh al-hulum, meaning that this was a child who was not yet even baligh. They describe what Qasim wears into the battlefield, that he wears sandals, he wears a long shirt, he wears an abba and an amama of his father. They give this description because Qasim was so young that he could not fit into the armor that a soldier should wear when they enter the battlefield. They describe and say that these 30,000 men, when they see this child enter the battlefield, they cry out that who sends the sliver of a moon to fight? That they understood that this is inappropriate, this is a difficulty, how difficult the situation must be that Hussein ibn Ali has allowed a child to enter the battlefield. Yet this didn't stop them from fighting the grandson of Rasulullah. That the battle against Qasim, as it's narrated, is one where they kill him with treachery. As a child who goes to fix his sandal, they strike him upon his head. The fact that when we talk about the Shahadat of Hazrat Qasim, we say that Imam Hussein, when he proceeds to Hazrat Qasim, he finds the enemy sitting with a sword over the neck of the child. There is no warrior who could call himself an Arab who would say that this was an action justified even in the act of war. This was complete indecency. That to abuse the deceased is wrong. To desecrate the body is wrong. Then in further to desecrate the body before the family has collected it or come to it, and to find, this is why we see the action of an Imam when he is enraged by this and he attacks this man. It's because the indecency, he says, you call yourself a Muslim and this is your behavior? When we read about the Shahadat of Ali al-Akbar, there's a description that one of my teachers would give. He says that when Ali al-Akbar falls in the battlefield, first and foremost, after they struck him the final blow, that the nature of horses in battle at that time was that when a rider would fall forward on their horse, the horse would know to bring the rider back to their camp. That if one became wounded and fell on his horse, the horse knew, was trained, come back to the camp. But they said they struck Ali al-Akbar in such a way that the blood that gushed from him flooded the eyes of the horse, that the horse could not see where it was going. And instead of taking the son of Imam Hussein back to Imam Hussein, this horse proceeded into the heart of the army of Umar Sa'd. And the aspect of indecency, that they each one who could took a sword, took a spear, and started to cut up the body of the young man on the horse. This was not the etiquette of warfare. This was not the culture of war, that if one has fallen in the battlefield, that you don't desecrate his body while he's there. But which is why they describe when Ali al-Akbar falls, he falls in the encampment of the army of Umar Sa'd. And then what they say is, my teacher narrates, he says, they made circles around the body of Akbar to watch and see, how does an old man bid farewell to his grown son? The intention was abuse. The intention was cause as much harm as they could, which is why one of the difficult narrations when Abul Fadl falls in the battlefield, when Imam Hussein proceeds to his brother, one narration says that Abul Fadl was calling out, he says, "O enemies of Allah, I know that you intend to cut me into pieces and to desecrate me. But allow me a moment to bid farewell to my brother before you desecrate my body." That even Abul Fadl knew when Imam Hussein reaches him in this condition. The abuse and the desecration that they did to the army of Imam Hussein was not normal warfare. The intent was to cause as much abuse as possible. And this did not stop with the shahadat of the Imam. But we saw that they abused and desecrated the grandson of Rasulullah. Then they abused and desecrated the women of Rasulullah. This nature of how these prisoners were taken and paraded was not a part of the akhlaq and etiquette of Islam. But that abuse that didn't end there left its mark, which is why we see that Rabab, when she returns from Sham and they stop in Karbala, this wife of Imam Hussein says, we left Aba Abdullah under the open sun. There was no ghusl or kafan done for my master. Therefore, Rabab will not seek shelter from the sun the way that Hussein was not given shelter. They said that Rabab stayed in the field of Karbala for 1 year. And when she died in a state of anger. The women had reacted to the effect of what was done in Karbala to such an extent. When one comes to visit Imam Zainul Abidin, he says, when I entered the house, it was the middle of the day, the heat of the sun was beating down. When I looked at the sahn of the house of Imam Zainul Abidin, I found some women standing under the heat of the sun. I thought to myself, how inappropriate that the Imam keeps his servants under the sun and the heat of the sun in these months. He says, I thought I would go and I would tell the Imam that he should not do such a thing. He says, when I sat with Imam Zainul Abidin, I said, Yabna Rasulullah, why do you treat your servants this way that they have to stand in the sun and the heat in this weather? The Imam replies with tears in his eyes, these are not servants of my house, these are the daughters of Rasulullah who stand under the open sun, who refuse to take shade. They say that we left the grandson of Rasulullah, the best of humanity. We left him in the field of Karbala. Remember the masa'ib, that on the 11th of Muharram, the abuse was such that when they took the women out of Karbala, they paraded them past the bodies of their family members in the field of Karbala. It was in that moment that they said that Sayyidah Zainab threw herself from the camel and proceeded to the body of Abu Abdullah, and she said, oh brother, it is the first time that Zainab is leaving you, but it is appropriate when a sister leaves her brother that she kisses the cheeks of her brother upon leaving him. Sayyidah Zainab cried out, oh brother, you have no cheeks for me to kiss. Oh brother, I will bid farewell to you. I will show my affection for you in a way that neither our mother nor our grandfather Rasulullah ever did. No one has loved you, O Hussein, the way Zainab has. Sayyidah Zainab bid farewell to Imam Hussein in the field of Karbala by kissing the cut throat of Imam Hussein in the field of Karbala to bid farewell to him. It was this memory that Imam Zainul Abidin says, these women, the daughters of Rasulullah, refuse to seek shelter under from the sun in any condition because they say, a high shelter for us. And our master Abu Abdullah was left without kafan under the sun of Karbala for 3 days. ألا لعنة الله على القوم الظالمين وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون رضا بقضائه وتسليما لأمره ندعوك باسمك العظيم الأعظم الأعز الأجل الأكرم. With tears in our eyes we raise our hands in dua and ask for, Ya Allah 10 times, Ya Allah, 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 Ya Mahmud بحق محمد يا أعلى بحق علي يا فاطر السماوات بحق فاطمة يا محسن بحق الحسن يا قديم الأحسان بحق الحسين. Oh Allah, accept this small ibadat from us. Ya Allah, cover our flaws, forgive our sins. Oh Allah, we have gathered here with hajat by the right of the mention of the Masa'ib of Imam Hussein. Fulfill our hajat. Ya Allah, there are those amongst their families, their communities, the mu'mineen who are suffering through sickness and disease. Ya Allah, give shafa'at to the mu'mineen wherever they are. Oh Allah, keep our children on the upright path of Islam. Ya Allah, hasten the reappearance of Sahibul Zaman. Make us and our families from the upright supporters of Sahibul Zaman. And entitle us to the ziyarat of Imam Hussein in this world and the shafa' of Imam Hussein in the hereafter. One surah Fatiha li arwah al-mu'minina wal-mu'minat ma'a salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Bismillah.
حسین 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 حسین
طے کیا سفر کیسے پہن بیڑیاں بید طے کیا سفر کیسے پہن بیڑیاں بید طے کیا سفر کیسے پہن بیڑیاں بید سر کھلے تھے ناقوں پر سر کھلے تھے ناقوں پر ساتھ بیبیاں بید طے کیا سفر کیسے پہن بیڑیاں بید طے کیا سفر کیسے پہن بیڑیاں 3 دن کے پیاسے تھے اور شدتیں تپتی 3 دن کے پیاسے تھے اور شدتیں تپتی اس نے کر دیا ہوگا کتنا نیم جاں بے طے کیا سفر کیسے پہن بیڑیاں سر بریدہ نیزوں پر رن میں بے کفن لاشیں سر بریدہ نیزوں پر رن میں بے کفن لاشیں کیسے دیکھا آنکھوں نے پائے وہ سما بے طے کیا سفر کیسے پہن بیڑیاں بے کجاوا اونٹوں پر ہے حرم برہنا سر بے کجاوا اونٹوں پر ہے حرم برہنا سر جھکائے جاتا ہے بن کے سارباں بے طے کیا سفر کیسے پہن بیڑیاں ذکر تشن کاموں کا صبح و شام کرتا ہے ذکر تشن کاموں کا صبح و شام کرتا ہے تو انیس ہے تجھ پر آج مہرباں بے طے کیا سفر کیسے پہن بیڑیاں بید یا حسین
یا حسین
یا حسین
یا حسین
یا حسین
یا حسین
آیا ہے علم اور علمدار نایا آیا ہے علم اور علمدار نایا دریا سے دل حیدر کرار نایا آیا ہے علم اور علمدار نایا آیا ہے جزاک اللہ اور علم او بازو جو کٹے دانتوں میں مشکی زیادہ بایا بازو جو کٹے دانتوں میں مشکی زیادہ بایا جب مشق چھیدی پھر وہ حیا دار نہ آیا آیا ہے علم اور علم ہر لاش بہی کے مددگار تغازی، ہر لاش پہ بھائی کا مددگار تغازی، آیا ہے علم اور علمدار نہ آیا، آیا ہے علم اور علمدار نہ آیا، او بازو جو کٹے دانتوں میں مشکیزاں دبایا، بازو جو کٹے دانتوں میں مشکیزاں دبایا، جب مشق چھدی پھر وہ حیا دار نہ آیا، آیا اے علم اور علمدار نہ آیا ہے علم اور جس وقت تماچے ہیں لگی بولی سکینہ، جس وقت تماچے ہیں لگی بولی سکینہ، کیا مجھ پہ چچا جان تمہیں پیار نہ آیا، اے علم اور علم ہے مجھ کو یقین نیزے پہ غازی کو یہ غم تھا، ہے مجھ کو یقین نیزے پہ غازی کو یہ غم، قبضے میں میرے شام کا بازار نہ آیا، آیا ہے علم اور علمدار نہ آیا، آیا ہے علم اور علمدار نہ آیا،
یا حسین یا حسین
شاہ شہید کربلا، شاہ شہید کربلا، لے لو سلام زینب کا، شاہ شہید کربلا، لے لو سلام زینب کا، شاہ شہید کربلا، آئی ہوں پھر سے نینوا، لے لو سلام زینب کا، شاہ
شہید کربلا،
شاہ شہید کربلا، بھیا 72 کا چہلم کروں گی، بھیا 72 کا چہلم، دل کھول کر آج ماتم کروں گی، دل کھول کر آج ماتم کروں گی، فرش عزا لو بچھ گیا، لے لو سلام زینب کا، شاہ شہید کربلا، شاہ شہید کربلا، بھیا لہو میرا سجاد رویا، بھیا لہو میرا سجاد رویا، میں سو سکی اور نہ سجاد سویا، میں سو سکی سجاد سویا، ہر ہر قدم تھی کربلا، لے لو سلام زینب کا، شاہ شہید کربلا، شاہ شہید کربلا، بھیا وطن جا کے میں کیا کروں گی، بھیا
وطن جا
کہ میں کیا کروں گی، اجڑے مدینے میں کیسے رہوں گی، اجڑے
مدینے میں
کیسے رہوں گی، مر جائے گی یہ غم زدہ، لے لو سلام زینب کا، شاہ
شہید
کربلا، شاہ
شہید
کربلا، میں بھی یہیں زائروں میں رہوں گی، میں بھی زائروں میں رہوں گی، اور زائروں کی میں خدمت کروں گی، اور زائروں کی میں خدمت کروں گی، یہ وقت پھر کب آئے گا، لے لو سلام زینب کا، شاہ شہید کربلا، ہے شہید کربلا، خون میں بھرا کرتا لے جا رہی ہوں، خون میں بھرا کرتا لے جا رہی ہوں، لیکن تمہاری قسم کھا رہی ہوں، لیکن
تمہاری
قسم کھا رہی ہوں، ہاروں گی نہ میں حوصلہ، لے لو سلام زینب کا، شاہ شہید کربلا، شاہ شہید کربلا، سارے شہید اب تمہارے حوالے، شاہ شہید اب تمہارے حوالے، میں اپنے ان غم زدوں کو سنبھالے، میں اپنے ان غم
زدوں کو
سنبھالے، لے جا رہی ہوں قافلہ، لے لو سلام زینب کا، شاہ
شہید کربلا،
شاہ
شہید کربلا،
بھیا سکینہ کو نہ لائی زینب، بھیا
سکینہ
کو نہ لائی زینب، زندان میں اس کو چھوڑائی زینب،
زندہ میں
اس کو چھوڑائی زینب، روتی رہی وہ میں لقا، لے لو سلام زینب کا، شاہ شہید کربلا، لے لو سلام زینب کا، آئی ہوں پھر سے نینوا، لے لو سلام زینب کا، شاہ شہید کربلا،
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اللهم صل على محمد وآله. السلام عليك يا أبا القاسم يا رسول الله يا المصطفى محمد بن عبد الله. السلام عليك يا أبا الحسن أمير المؤمنين المرتضى علي بن أبي طالب. السلام عليك يا فاطمة بنت محمد الزهراء سيدة النساء العالمين. السلام عليك يا أبو محمد حسن بن علي الناصح المجتبى. السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله الحسين بن علي سيد الشهداء. السلام عليك يا أبا الفضل العباس بن أمير المؤمنين. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليك يا أبا الحسن علي بن الحسين الزين العابدين. السلام عليك يا أبا جعفر محمد بن علي الباقر. السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله جعفر بن محمد الصادق. السلام عليك يا أبا الحسن موسى بن جعفر الكاظم.
السلام عليك يا أبا الحسن علي بن موسى الرضا. السلام عليك يا أبا جعفر محمد بن علي التقي الجواد. السلام عليك يا أبا الحسن علي بن محمد الحادي النقي. السلام عليك يا أبا محمد حسن بن علي الزكي العسقري. السلام عليك يا إمام صاحب العصر والزمان. السلام عليك يا شريك القرآن. السلام عليك يا إمام الإنس والجان. أجل الله تعالى فرجك وسهل الله مخرجك. السلام عليك يا سيدي يا ابن رسول الله ورحمة الله وبركاته. اللهم صل. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم كن لوليك الحجة بن الحسن صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه في هذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة وليا وحافظا وقائدا وناصرا ودليلا وعينا حتى تسكنه أرضك طوعا وتمتعه فيها طويلا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين.
مومن و مومنات، ایک سورہ فاتحہ کی درخواست کی گئی ہے. ممتاز فاطمہ شیخ، شیخ شوکت علی، شیخ لیاقت علی، شیخ شمیم اختر، محمد اکرم خان اور کل مومن اور مومنات کے لیے.
مومنین و مومنات، ایک اعلان کرنا چاہتا ہوں کہ کل انشاءاللہ میرے قریب خانے پہ ایک امیر کی مجلس-e-Aza منعقد ہوگی. 1:30 بجے انشاءاللہ باجماعت نماز کے بعد 2 بجے وقت کی پابندی کے لحاظ سے مجلس شروع کر دی جائے گی. جن کو معلوم ہے کہ وقت کی پابندی کا خیال رکھا جاتا ہے تو آپ لوگوں سے شرکت کی استدعا ہے وقت کی پابندی کے لحاظ سے انشاءاللہ. جن کو ایڈریس چاہیے، ویسے تو ایڈریس بھیجا جا چکا ہے، لیکن جن کو ایڈریس چاہیے میں یہاں پہ موجود ہوں.
مومن و مومنات، یہ اعلان بھی سماعت فرمانے، کل بھی مجلس کا سلسلہ اسی طریقے سے شروع ہوگا. نماز ہوگی 8 بجے اور اس کے فوراً بعد مجلس-e-Aza شروع کر دی جائے گی. تمام مومن اور مومنات سے شرکت کی درخواست ہے. اور سنڈے کو جو عید زہرہ کا پروگرام بھی اسی ٹائم پہ ہی شروع کیا جائے گا. تو تمام مومن اور مومنات سے شرکت کی درخواست ہے. بر محمد و آل محمد صلوات.